Hi, I'm Lenora Bresler. Welcome to the April 7th, 2017 edition of the Bible, Delight in the Details. We are preparing ourselves for Easter by discussing the Last Supper. Yesterday we talked about that 4 days prior to Passover was Preparation Day, when families all over Israel chose their own family lamb, an unblemished, perfect lamb, with which to identify, so that when he was sacrificed, they would recognize that he was being sacrificed for them in their place. Interestingly, Preparation Day falls on what we think of as Palm Sunday, when Christ was brought into the city of Jerusalem. Now, interestingly, we all know what the Gospels say people shouted out. They shouted out, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, there are a lot of things to be said about this. Over time, the word Hosanna had come to be thought of also in a political context. It literally means save us, but it also carried some political ramifications. That's why the Romans became so frightened of Jesus and what might be about to happen. But to those more religiously minded, they would have understood that Christ coming into Jerusalem on the day that the lambs were selected was very appropriate, because Christ was going to be our Passover lamb, and he was being cheered by the people. Now later, of course, they would call for his death, but that's exactly what happens to a Passover lamb. The Passover lamb is selected for his perfection and his blamelessness, and then 4 days later he is killed, and that is what saves the people. It's very ironic, isn't it? As you think of Jesus entering Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday, hearing Hosanna, Hosanna, save us, save us, he indeed was the lamb being selected to save the world. Now, we had talked yesterday about how it was Peter and John to whom Jesus gave the great honor and responsibility of preparing for the Passover on Preparation Day, which we would have known as Maundy, Thursday. During the meal itself, they would have reclined. They would have been in something like a Roman triclinium, which is a dining room in a Roman house. But the Jewish homes were very much following the same kind of tradition. And that would be that people would be literally lying down on stone benches, very long benches that would have been in a U shape around the dining room. They would have propped themselves up on their left hand, and then they would have been serving themselves with their right. There would have been a pillow around their head and their back to support them. Because the benches were so long, people could literally lay almost side by side. And this is why we know that John was placed to the right of Jesus, because in the Gospels it says that the disciple whom Jesus loved, and we know that that is how John referred to himself, was laying on, his head was on the bosom of Christ. This means that he was to the right of Christ. Now, this would have been appropriate because the leader of the group, or the father of the family, would have been at the head or the lead of the table, wherever that was considered. The youngest person, who has duties to ask questions during the Passover meal, would have sat to the father or leader's right. Tradition tells us that John was the youngest of the disciples, so he is what we would say correctly, and what we would assume would be correctly placed. Now, Peter might have assumed that he would have sat to the left of Christ, because he had been given the honor of preparing the location. But we find out later in the Gospels that actually the person probably to the left of Christ in the location of honor was none other than Judas Iscariot. Why do I say that? Because when people were asking, who is he who's going to betray you, Christ told them, it's he who dips the sop with me in the dish. Now, sop was the bread, the matzah bread. We'll talk about that, the unleavened bread. And the sop, that was the sop. And there would have been oil, like olive oil, in which you would dip your bread. And it would have been passed from the host, the leader, to his left, because in that day you passed things to the left. So whoever was considered the guest of honor or the most important would have been to the left. Now that might shock us that Judas Iscariot was in that position, but perhaps not, because we know he held an official role in Jesus' ministry. He was the treasurer. So that might not have been an unusual seating arrangement for him. But it certainly is ironic, isn't it? That the person that would betray Christ allowed to sit in the place of honor. It reminds us that we too have betrayed Christ at times, sinning and not living up to our potential and not living up to the mark, which is a sinless life. And so yet Christ still thinks of us as someone worthy and someone worthy of being saved. It's interesting that Peter might have been very confused and upset by this perhaps diminution in his authority and where he sat. It's interesting that Christ, in washing the feet of the disciples, a role that would have been reserved for the lowliest of servants, which he did willingly, there was an interaction with Peter. Peter is the one that said, "Oh no, Lord, you're not going to wash my feet." And Christ told him, "Unless you let me wash your feet, you can have no part of me," showing that true love, true sacrifice means that you reduce yourself. You're not worried about position, location at a table. He himself, Christ, God himself, was willing to do the most menial tasks. And we must receive that and then go and do likewise. It's an interesting interaction that it was Peter, the person who might have been upset about where he was located, who got that special lesson. I'm Lenora Bresler. Visit me tomorrow on the next edition as we prepare for Easter on the Bible. Delight in the details. Have a great day.